Now with the latest is Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who's been there front and center. Senator, welcome to Washington Watch.
Hey, Tony, it's good to be on with you, and welcome to all of those Americans who came to Washington today for the March for Life. Earlier today, I was able to greet several Arkansans who came up with some donuts and coffee in our office in the Senate before we had to get going on day 4 of the Adam Schiff show in the United States Senate.
I tell you what, I was talking with House Minority Leader McCarthy yesterday about. I'm not sure how you guys can. I know most of the personalities in the Senate. I don't know how you guys are sitting still for so long to listen to the same thing over and over.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge at sometimes, Tony. I guess it helps to have been in the Army where you have to sit in a hide site for a potential ambush for 24 hours at a time. But I think I'd rather sit still in a hide site in Iraq for 24 hours than sit in the Senate listening to Adam Schiff for 9 hours in one day. One thing that strikes me when I'm sitting there is just how repetitive the House Democrats are, and that's in part because of how thin the evidence is for these articles of impeachment. I mean, they repeat themselves every 30 or 60 minutes, and that's in part because they have so little evidence to prove their case. Let's put aside the constitutional question, just the evidence that the president took inappropriate action and broke the law by, say, withholding aid from Ukraine. The law only said the aid had to be released by September 30th. He released the aid on September 12th or so. And then all these Democrats up on their high horse about how this brief pause of a few weeks in releasing this aid somehow imperiled Ukraine and soldiers were dying in Ukraine for this. Where were those Democrats up on their high horse back in the Obama era when for 3 years Barack Obama refused to send any lethal aid to those soldiers? It's Donald Trump who has sent Javelin anti-tank missiles or night vision goggles to Ukraine's military and enabled them to defend themselves more effectively. Barack Obama sent them blankets and meals ready to eat. I don't remember these Democrats crying back then about the noble fight that the Ukrainians were not able to carry on because of Barack Obama.
But now, President Trump also, in the law, the National Defense Authorization Act, he was required to ensure that the issue of corruption had been addressed before releasing the funds. So by delving into this issue of corruption, that's consistent with the law that Congress passed, is it not?
Yes, Tony, and unfortunately, Ukraine is a struggling democracy in which corruption has been endemic for 25 years. Across changes of administrations, very different leaders, and very, very different parties in Ukraine, corruption has remained endemic. It is a real concern there. And one obvious, glaring conflict of interest is the conflict between Hunter Biden, on the one hand, going to work for a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch being paid $80,000 a month with no apparent qualifications, and Vice President Joe Biden, on the other hand, leading Ukraine policy for the Obama administration, not just from the Oval Office, but boasting about how he flew to Kiev and told the president, we're going to withhold this security aid if you don't fire the prosecutor, the very prosecutor who had a case open against Hunter Biden's patron. I mean, that is a glaring and obvious conflict of interest. Anyone who heard about that, to include the president, would be concerned about it. That's one reason why yesterday you saw the Democrats spend 3 hours on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. 3 hours trying to convince the American people that it was irrelevant and it was not an issue at all. Anyone who can see those circumstances know that it's at least reasonable to look into that, to consider exactly what happened when Joe Biden told the Ukrainian president, fire the prosecutor that has a case open on my son's boss.
I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test. There's clearly a problem there. You talked about how hearing the same thing over, the lack of evidence. I mean, and I certainly have not heard as much as you have because I cannot stand there and watch all of this. I've watched parts of it, but it sounds like they're not going beyond the talking points. They've developed these talking points, and it's just a repetitive process of repeating these, I would almost say, talking points that have emerged from focus groups.
Well, I can assure you, Tony, that they are repeating themselves over and over and over again. If this were in a courtroom, and it's not, and there are real differences between a judicial case and a court of impeachment, the judge would have long ago gavelled down the House Democrats and told them to move on for being repetitive. But again, one of the reasons they're repetitive is that they have so little evidence to support their articles of impeachment. Now, that's not because they didn't try. Don't buy this line that, oh, we need witnesses and we need documents. They had 17 different witnesses in the House who have really nothing to add to the picture except hearsay and their speculation, and at root, their disagreement with the president's Ukraine policy. Now, that's fine. They're entitled to their opinion. They're not entitled to try to impeach the President of the United States because they disagree with his policy. The President sets foreign policy for this country. Furthermore, there are so many documents over in the House that as of last night, they still haven't physically transmitted them to the Senate because they don't know how to get them over here. So don't fall for this line that there have not been witnesses and documents. There have been plenty of witnesses and documents. They just don't say what the House Democrats wish they said.
Well, I'm not going to be accused of the same thing as the Democrats because I want to move on to some other topics. I want to talk about, Senator, you made reference, Senator Cotton, to folks in your office coming up earlier today, coming up for the March for Life. I mean, this is an issue that is you're passionate about. This is an administration that's advancing life. There's many policies kind of really just on hold because the Congress has been preoccupied with this issue of trying to find a crime that would match the charge that really was leveled day one of this administration, trying to remove this president from office.
Yeah, and Tony, it's important to remind everyone that they have been doing this since the first day the president was in office. This is at least the third, maybe the fourth time they've tried to impeach Donald Trump. And when this one fails, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to again. Because in the end, no matter what the specific allegations are in any particular article of impeachment, it all gets back to Donald Trump's one unforgivable sin: beating crooked Hillary in 2016 and being poised to beat the Democrats in 2020 yet again.
Yeah, that's the real issue here. But when you look at the policies that are not being advanced and some of the things that are missing, I'm very concerned, and I know you're, as a veteran of the Army, as a part of the Senate, which pays close attention to foreign policy issues, I'm very concerned about what's happening globally that we might be missing. I mean, it's almost as if we're seeing a second Arab Spring, what's happened in Lebanon, what's happened in Iraq, what is unfolding in Iran. I mean, there's some very significant things happening globally.
Indeed, Tony. And in fact, the biggest of all that's happened in the last few weeks was when President Trump authorized the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the terror mastermind of Iran. It's hard to overstate just what a significant victory that is for the United States and for the good guys in the Middle East. Qasem Soleimani had the blood of thousands of Americans on his hand, to include soldiers who served in Iraq at the same time I was there. Not to say hundreds of thousands of people across the Middle East, from Syria to his own people in Iran. And there's no doubt from the intelligence that he was planning a major attack against Americans in the coming weeks or days. So the world is a much better place now that Qasem Soleimani is no longer a part of this world. And I would liken the president's action here to what he did with Ukraine. In the same way that Barack Obama sent the Ukrainians blankets and Donald Trump sent them anti-tank missiles, Barack Obama sent pallets of cash to Qasem Soleimani.
Yeah.
Donald Trump sent him Hellfire missiles.
A very sharp contrast, indeed. When you look at the overall policies of this administration, and not just the policies, but as you've described, the way this president works, he's been described as a disruptor. I think that's true on his foreign policy. He's shaking things up. It's as if we're going beyond the era of containment to actually problem solving.
That's for sure, Tony. I think if you move a little bit to the east on the globe, you can see this happening in China. I think one of the biggest and most lasting legacies of the Trump foreign policy will be reorienting the United States' view towards China. Now, you and I, for a long time, have known how depraved the Chinese Communist Party can be, whether it's the brutal one-child policy that led to forced abortions and forced sterilizations for decades, or literally harvesting the organs of political prisoners, oppressing religious minorities, whether Muslims in the West or Christians in the East. Too many Americans, though, were not awake to that threat. And in part, I have to say, because a lot of politicians in my party just viewed China as a place to send our jobs and factories and get a lot of cheap stuff in return and get rich in the meantime.
Right. Exactly.
Because this is one area where Democrats, especially some of the leaders like Chuck Schumer, have been more alive to the threat. Donald Trump has made sure that Republicans in Washington understand that China is a serious and ongoing threat to our way of life, and I think that's going to last beyond his presidency.
A very, very good point and a great point to end on. Senator Tom Cotton, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'd really like to continue this conversation on foreign policy because I think oftentimes we miss the importance of that. And this is it's an opportune time around the world to reshuffle what's happening. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.